Hello, my name is Omid Abdi, and today for my AP Psych project, I studied schizophrenia. So I actually didn't know that much about schizophrenia before I researched it. I actually didn't really know anything. I only knew that I'd seen some schizophrenic people, and I've looked into it a little bit because one of my relatives has schizophrenia, but I didn't realize how complex of a disease it actually is. So I'll first go into the cause of schizophrenia. So there's a few different causes. First of all, it could either just be from genetics. You can get it from your parents or any just genetically. It can be genetically coded. But it can also come from other things that develop after birth, like brain injuries, like trauma to the head, concussions, stuff like that. Very traumatic experiences, and also drugs like LSD and marijuana in the developmental stages of kids. They say most commonly in their teens. So there are two different types of symptoms for schizophrenia. So the first symptom is actually called a positive symptom, and it's not positive, but what they mean by that is that it's an extra, like, additional. I think they were saying that as an additional layer to the disease. So instead, like the negative effects are like things that you feel like lack of like energy or something, but the positive symptoms are things that are added like hallucinations or what's it called delusions that these people see. um Obviously they're not positive symptoms, but that's what they're called. And then the negative symptoms of schizophrenia are loss of enjoyment of just doing anything, loss of um like motivation, loss of wanting to hang out with people, and an inability to feel emotions. Those are the main symptoms for schizophrenia. And then actually, I didn't realize, but there are a different. I mean, there are five different subsets of schizophrenia, being paranoid schizophrenia, hebephrenic schizophrenia, catatonic schizophrenia, residual schizophrenia, and then senestopathic schizophrenia. Sorry, I didn't memorize these terms. Okay, but basically, so paranoid schizophrenia is the most common form of schizophrenia. Um, it's where you have some hallucinations that form, but your bodily function is usually normal, and there isn't that much disruption between like your mental state and your actual physical state. Um, but you can experience something called like word salad, where you start speaking and then you just like ramble on a bunch of random words that make no like in a random order that make no particular sense. So that's the most common form of schizophrenia. And then there's hebephrenic schizophrenia, which is called disorganized schizophrenia, which is the one that usually develops, but from when you're like a teenager, like 15 years old to like 25 years old, I think it said. And this one is when you have a disorganized mentality and you have like short delusions and short spurts of hallucinations, but that happens very frequently. So your whole like your mindset is very like distraught and distorted, and so it's very hard to live with this type of. It's so hard to live with all the different types of schizophrenia, but this one specifically, because it's very hard to be like focused and like stay on a task because it's like um constant external like challenges like these hallucinations and delusions. There's also catatonic schizophrenia, which is the rarest type of schizophrenia, which is characterized by, let me remember, limited movements and yeah. So this one is the one where you can like completely change within an instant. It's actually very rare. I think there's only like, I think it said either 0.1 or 1% of people that have schizophrenia have this type of schizophrenia. And it's where like the person can be completely normal 1 second and then completely abnormal the next second. So say someone's super introverted and they're super quiet, the next second they can just like switch it on and start talking and like start mimicking exactly what someone else is saying. And they can't really control it. They can also switch between. They also usually switch between being active and being still. And then there's residual schizophrenia, which is, um, it comes from when you had schizophrenia in the past or you were diagnosed before, and then you don't your symptoms aren't as they're not as like severe, but you still experience some of the symptoms. And at this point, it said you don't experience any of the positive symptoms anymore, like the delusions or hallucinations, but you still experience the bad symptoms like the slow movement, poor memory, lack of concentration, and poor hygiene. And then this is most common in people with that go through psychosis. Um, but then with residual schizophrenia, there's also something called the flat effect, which is when someone's had schizophrenia and after that, what this can occur also when they have schizophrenia, but it's when they have like almost they show no emotion on their face. It's kind of scary actually. I've talked to someone with schizophrenia, and um, that can be really hard. Like I can't imagine living with that because you speak like monotone, and there's also like no expression on your face. And you show like very little emotion, so it's hard to talk to people. Um, and then there's a synestopathic schizophrenia, which is they said it's like the other category that they're not sure of yet, but it's basically the schizophrenia that's characterized by like only by unusual like bodily sensations. That's what it said, but I looked more into it and I couldn't find that much detail on it. But then lastly, we have like the effects of schizophrenia on the brain. So there's two brain messenger chemicals or neurotransmitter. What's it called? Dopamine and glutamate. So dopamine is tied to the delusions and the hallucinations, and in areas that rely on dopamine in the brain, in schizophrenic patients, these areas are like on overdrive basically and are super overactive. So the one theory is that this like these overactive parts of the brain actually causes schizophrenia, and the overactive parts of the brain specifically that rely on dopamine, because dopamine is also linked to addiction. Um, yeah, and then glutamate is it helps to form new memories and learn new things. And at first, they say with schizophrenic patients, at first there's too much glutamate activity, but then as time goes on, your glutamate activity actually goes lower than what it's supposed to be and what is normal um, in regular people. Not regular people, but people without schizophrenia. And finally, the part that shocked me there's two things actually. The first thing I'll talk about is the default mode network. So this is what I don't know if it's scientists or psychologists. They call it when basically you have no stresses. You've relieved yourself of all your other responsibilities in life, and it's like their mode that you go into when you can just daydream and relax and like think, plan, reflect. And they say with schizophrenic patients, this mode is always in overdrive. So it's very hard for them to like have some time to just relax and like calm down and think about everything, reflect on everything. So that's also a big problem with schizophrenic patients. That is really hard for them to be able to like relax and just take some time and like step back from everything. But the part that actually shocked me the most about my like research I did was that if you don't treat it medically, um, it's actually like it leads to significant loss of gray matter in the brain and also significant loss of like brain mass overall. So they did a bunch of studies and they found that individuals with schizophrenia who were not medically treated and who never treated their schizophrenia lost up to 25% of gray matter in their brain in certain areas, which is like that's crazy. Um, I haven't heard of any other. I only know like one or two other diseases that are that severe on like brain damage. And also, this says for overall brain mass, I found one source that said, or one study that said 3 to 5%, but I also found another study that said like upwards of 10% of overall brain loss in terms of like mass. So it's actually really important that these people like seek help because it can have actual effects like on their physical health as well as their like mental health and their also just their like their well-being in general. But thank you so much. Um, I learned a lot about schizophrenia actually, and thank you so much for everything this year. Have a great summer.